Hey there, g'day Year 12 students. So, I know I've been showing you a lot of the 2020 videos because of the phase of the year where we're at. Mr. Smith and I conferencing together and trying to work together about what is the best avenue to go down for the upcoming SAC to both sort of cover everything that was required to be covered, but also make sure that we don't fill too much information for you when it would be easier to fill some of this information when we do return to school. So making some decisions around the psychological strategies from chapter 16 and how we're going to tackle that, I thought I'd put this video together for you. So this is a very similar video to the tutorial videos that you've been using over the last week or so, where I'm going to talk through. You might want to take some notes and pause the video as we go. It is going to be a rather lengthy one, even though I'm only covering one aspect, and I apologize for that. But it's really important that we cover all the right things leading into the SAC. It is our final SAC, SAC 7. It's taking place Tuesday, I believe, period 2, if you check your SAC timetable of next week, which is the last week of term, week 10. Okay, so I'm going to flip the video down now and I'm just going to show you a couple of things. Firstly, I'm over here in our Compass page. You'll notice that on our Compass page, and I've directed you here many times, we have a SAC preparation folder. I've added there SAC 7, and the what you need to know sheet is sitting directly in there. I'm just going to open that up and just talk you through it very quickly. So SAC 7 is about chronic adaptations, and it's also covering a bit of psychological strategies. Okay, it is on Tuesday the 14th of September. Please note that 75% of the marks, or very close to that percentage, will come from the chronic adaptations, and the psychological strategies will only make up about 25%. So you need to be able to explain 2 chronic adaptations from each of the body's systems. Okay, so that is cardiovascular, respiratory, and muscular. So that is a detailed explanation of 2 of each. All right, so it might be worth you looking into which ones improve the performance in your opinion the most. You need to be able to identify changes that take place when we're working maximally, submaximally, and also at rest. And so talking about things like, because the heart is larger and therefore more blood is ejected per beat, and because the heart might be stronger because the walls of the heart are thicker and therefore the stroke volume is increased, the heart rate will decrease. And that is a long-term change. A chronic adaptation is that during rest, that sort of stuff takes place. So knowing what is happening both at jogging, that's submaximal, at sprinting, the maximal, and also at rest is important to differentiate. You do need to know the difference between both aerobic and anaerobic changes, okay? And in particular, looking at the muscular system, okay? You need to look at which training type, whether it's aerobic training, resistance training, anaerobic training, etc., will elicit which response in which system. And you also need to understand what the specific muscular adaptations are when we do resistance training. The neuromuscular adaptations, talking about the brain and the messages from the brain down to the muscle, is important to know as well. So essentially everything that is sitting inside that chapter 15 is pretty important, that you're feeling comfortable, confident, you've rewatched my videos, you've looked at your ed rollos, you've been working through the peak questions, you do the practice SAC that we administer you to this week. Okay, as we move on to chapter 16, you'll notice it's quite a very short list, okay, and we've actually removed quite a lot of stuff. So from the what you need to know sheet, we are focusing on arousal, and I am going to go through that in this video today to ensure that you have the knowledge you need from chapter 16. Obviously, our regular list of resources to look at, okay, and a couple of little hashtags that Mr. Smith put down here for you, just as we know that it is tough to stay motivated, but we've got just over 1 week to go. 2 weeks today, just over 1 week by the time you're watching this video. Keep pushing on, let's get through this, all right? So I am going to flash up now just some notes for you, okay? And I'm going to talk you through these notes, and I am going to explain some important parts of these notes, and I'm going to try not to make this video too long. This is a brilliant page for you to have a real good read through, page 364 of the Nelson textbook. Okay, this is the chapter summary from chapter 15. If, as you're reading through these dot points, it makes sense to you, then you're on the right track. So as I read through this dot point, chronic adaptations occur as a physiological response to the increased demands placed on the body through training. Now, there's so much that goes through my brain as I read that dot point. Physiological, that means stuff is actually physically changing inside my body. The number of capillaries, the size of the muscle, the thickness of the heart walls, the size of the heart. Each of these things is actually physically changing because I increase the demands. That means progressive overload took place through training, and that was an effectively administered training program. Adaptations due to training can occur in respiratory, cardiovascular, and muscular systems. The adaptation occurs is related to the type of training undertaken. That's just such a critical point. And if you look at the what you need to know sheet that I just went through, it goes through. You need to know that if you do anaerobic based training, this will happen. If you do aerobic based training, this will happen. If you do muscular resistance training, this will take place. So I'm not going to read through every single one of those dot points, but those sorts of conversations that are going through my head, that inner monologue or dialogue, is what needs to be going through your brains if you want to feel comfortable and confident with chronic adaptations. Moving on, chapter 16 is all about psychological strategies that enhance performance. This includes sleep, confidence, motivation, arousal, mental imagery, and concentration. And it can help aid recovery as well as enhance performance. So if you look at that in diagrammatic form, each of those things I just listed, today I'm just going to cover arousal regulation. We will cover the rest before the exam, but today I'm just focusing on the arousal as a psychological strategy. All right, so we move forward in the textbook to page 374. Achieving optimal arousal. This is about the amount of readiness or activation. So how ready is somebody to complete a task that they're faced with? Okay. Athletes will actually need a perfect optimal level of arousal if they want to experience success. So we don't just say, if you're really, really, really aroused or excited about an activity, you're going to do well. Because as you know, and this happens so often in sport, you can actually have a game where there is a team that is at the top of the ladder and they're playing the bottom of the ladder. And you would make the assumption that they should win comfortably. They've beaten all these good teams. This team is struggling. They're coming up against them. And how often does it happen that that team absolutely dominates or wins that shouldn't have won that game? And a lot of it can come down to this. It can come down to athletes were not as overly excited to go into that game because the challenge level appeared to be low. And that is all to do with the readiness and activation as you head into a game. It can also relate to things like motivation, etc., and excitability. However, how ready am I to play this game is all about arousal. Okay, and it can directly relate to performance. So we talk about this thing called the zone, and it's about an optimal zone. So I'm a really graphical diagrammatic person here. So I look straight at this graph, which is on the top of page 375. And you'll notice that down the bottom, along this axis horizontally here, is the arousal level. So as I'm down this area, I am less excited or ready to play the sport or game on that day. And as I head all the way up here, I am way too excited to play in that game today. Okay, so let's think about this. That team that's at the top of the ladder that's playing bottom of the ladder, that's not a very excitable game. That's a game that you go into it thinking, I should win this, no problem. It's almost a bit of boredom. And what it leads to is a low level of performance, because this vertical axis here is how well will I perform. So if I have a low level of arousal, then I actually have a low level of performance. Now let's talk about the flip side of things. We're not playing a mid-season game against bottom of the ladder, we're playing in the grand final. My readiness and excitability level might actually be through the roof, because I'm just feeling very anxious and I'm very nervous about this game, that can actually lead to the same low level of performance. So, what we actually find here is that in terms of readiness, so let's go back here, the amount of readiness or activation to complete a task, we actually want to find this optimal level of arousal, and that is the arousal zone over here. Now, you can see that this graph is like an upside down U, and this is where the inverted U theory comes into play. And you will hear this a lot, and it is about an upside down U shape that shows that right in this midpoint here is the sweet spot of perfect amount of readiness, but not being overly ready and therefore can't focus, which leads to the highest level of performance. Okay, so we've got the zone of optimal performance there. Now, low level of arousal, performance will be poor. People show low levels of potentially motivation, boredom, tired, etc. in the actions in their game. Your muscles can actually feel heavy and lethargic. Your concentration levels drop. The enthusiasm drops, okay, and the apathy rises. However, when you're sitting over here at that grand final level, high levels of performance, high levels of arousal, the performance will suffer. They feel tense, highly excited, anxious. Muscles actually become tense. Movements become jerky. Coordination drops and mistakes increase. Okay, so what's really important here is that we understand about that inverted U. There are many factors that can cause you to change whether you go up or down on the arousal level, which can affect your performance. And I've already spoken about things like a grand final. But if you haven't done proper training, that can affect how ready you feel. If your teammates aren't performing well or they're lacking dedication, if there's conflict amongst team, if the refereeing comes into play and you feel like it's poor officiating, if your coach makes poor decision making, if you lose a game that you should have won, criticism by the press, etc., all of these things can affect your readiness of that game or the next game. So some athletes will take things like an anxiety test or calculator, and you'll notice that in the labs that we completed for SAC 5, we actually asked what your arousal level or excitability level was prior to completing each training session. And this was a part of a link to that knowledge there. So if somebody is ticking boxes that are going to score them very high or very low, then there's actually things that we can do. So if your coach understands that along this arousal axis that you are overly anxious or aroused or under aroused, ready for a performance, there are things we can do to move you up or down that continuum. And they come into here, the arousal regulation. And we can put people back into that sweet spot in the zone in the middle by either reducing the arousal using particular techniques or promoting the arousal using particular techniques. So promotion will take place when somebody has a low level of arousal and we can promote them up, and reduction will take place before that grand final when people are overly aroused and we need to bring them back down. I am not going to spend time on this video reading to you every single one of these techniques, but you can see on page 377 onwards, 378, 379, and 380 that there are a range of different techniques. Let me speak quickly to a couple of them and expand on one or two. Progressive muscle relaxation. This is about lying down, taking control of your body, tensing a muscle and relaxing a muscle to overall reduce any tension within muscles around the body. It is a progressive technique where you start at the head and work your way down to the toes to get control over your muscles and brain and body again. Meditation takes place where people will shut their mind off and try and believe that they can move out of the space that they're currently in to try and focus on things other than the race, the game, the performance. Okay, so each of these are trying to reduce high levels of arousal and relax people. Then we've got breathing control, okay? This is where obviously if we're overly excited, we can actually refocus, take control of our breathing, block out any distractions, and take some really slow and controlled breaths and actually bring our heart rate back down as well. Biofeedback here is all about using different techniques and instruments, about being able to excuse me, regulate how our body is feeling. So we can do things like heart rate monitors, we can use some skin temperature testings, we can work out exactly how our body is feeling and try and bring down the levels of arousal using technology and other things. There is stress inoculation training. I'm not going to cover that right now, okay? And then we can move on to the promotion techniques. Now, there is one that can be used as arousal or promotion, and I might talk about it momentarily, and that is that we can actually use music to both pump up and relax our brain. So you can imagine that in the overly aroused situation where you want to reduce, you might listen to slower, more calming music, and it can take a place in this meditation as well, okay? While you're doing that, you might control your breathing at the same time and really bring the arousal levels down. However, you might actually seem to be under aroused, and one of the ways that you can pump yourself up is to elevate your breathing rate. So take a few quick deep breaths and try and bring that heart rate up. Or maybe just jump around a little bit and yell nice and loud to act energetically. That will get the blood flowing and pumping and have some adrenaline be released inside the body. There's things like positive self-talk. Come on, you can do this, you can do this. That will bring our arousal levels up as well. But don't forget what I mentioned just before, which was around that playing of music. And if you want to pump yourself up, then sometimes playing motivational music that has a fast and heavy beat will actually help take in time the rhythm of your heart and actually bring your arousal levels up and your motivation and concentration as well. Okay, so I'm really hopeful that in those strategies I've given you, you're able to understand how we can move up and down that arousal level. And when we do, if we are down too low, the performance will be low. If we're up too high, the performance will be low. And right in the middle is that sweet spot that performs high for an athlete. So we want to use both reduction and promotion techniques that I just explained to you, like listening to music, breathing control, etc., to try and get the person, the athlete, to have the right amount of arousal or readiness or excitability heading into a game. Now, that is just one of the psychological strategies that we're going to cover. That one will be examined on the upcoming SAC, so be ready for it, okay? You might want to stop this video, pause, take some notes, even go and answer some questions in the peak book around this, and understand that arousal curve being critical to earning marks in SACs and exams. We're always available if you need any help, Mr. Smith and myself. You just send us an email, let us know. Zooms can be set up, okay? We really want to make sure that everyone does their best on the last SAC and set themselves up for really good success in the exam upcoming. So please use us as a resource. Use your textbook, use your Ed Rolos, do the practice questions, and seek feedback from us as well. I'll speak to you soon.